Well, as you heard Pete say, it's been on the market for just 5 years, but OxyContin has quickly become a dangerous street drug. New York Times Magazine traces the fast, addictive path of the OxyContin in this Sunday's issue. And earlier today, I spoke with Paul Tuff, an editor for the Times Magazine. Paul Tuff, good morning, and thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
How did OxyContin go from being a prescription painkiller, legitimately helping people, to kind of the drug du jour?
Well, one of the reasons that OxyContin is so successful as a legitimate prescription drug is its time-release function. For the first time, this is an opioid painkiller that doesn't release its pain relief all at once. It releases it slowly over the course of 12 hours. And what people in different communities all over the eastern United States figured out a couple of years ago was that that time-release function could be really easily defeated simply by crushing the pill. When you crush it, you get a powder that is chemically very similar to powdered heroin.
And it gives a high similar to heroin?
It does. It gives a high similar to heroin, and it also gives a low similar to heroin. It creates terrible withdrawal symptoms and addiction as well.
You talked to a number of the people who have become addicted. What did they tell you about how it happened?
In a lot of cases, they didn't understand what was happening. Especially in Appalachia, there's a bit of a tradition of prescription drug abuse, just sort of as a casual sort of thing. That there were mild painkillers in the past that people would crush and snort, and they would get high, but they wouldn't be terribly addicted. This new pain pill came along, and a lot of people thought it was the same sort of thing. It wasn't going to be that much different. And suddenly they're snorting something which is chemically very similar to heroin, and within a couple of months they found themselves with withdrawal symptoms and addiction.
In fact, there was an entire town in Maine that wanted this taken off the market?
There are a lot of people in Maine and in Appalachia who are suggesting that this drug be taken off the market. There's a petition going around. There are lawsuits from both private citizens and the Attorney General of West Virginia against the company that makes it, Purdue Pharma, looking for damages and also seeking for restrictions to be put on the pill.
Part of the problem is that people who are getting legitimate prescriptions, people who are in pain and who have been prescribed this for a very specific reason, are selling the drug. Why?
Well, that's certainly not true in all cases. I think most people who are prescribed this drug really need it and are using it themselves. But for other people, the money is just too much of a temptation. This is a drug that, especially if you're on public assistance, can be obtained very cheaply and can be sold for a great deal of money, as much as $2,000 for a month-long prescription.
So these people are in pain and they're trying to survive without it.
Yes, I heard about some people who would get a prescription to OxyContin and also get a prescription to something milder like Vicodin. And they would take the Vicodin and sell the OxyContin and use the money to pay their medical bills, to support them in other ways.
How else does this drug get out onto the market in illegal ways?
Well, in some areas, most recently in the suburbs of Boston, there have been a number of pharmacy robberies and burglaries. In the Boston suburbs in the past month or so, there have been more than a dozen armed robberies of drugstores by what the police describe as a gang of young men wearing baseball caps and bandanas and looking primarily for OxyContin.
What about this new warning? Do you think it'll be helpful at all in reducing at least the demand for this drug in illegal ways?
I'm not sure if it will reduce the demand, but I think it might reduce the supply. I think it's a great idea. I think that one of the biggest problems is that this drug, for the first time, was a long-acting opioid that was being prescribed by family doctors, by people who hadn't been trained in pain relief or in addiction. And what this warning says to doctors is you need to be really careful in prescribing this drug. You need to be much more aware than you have been in the past about how people can abuse it, the fact that people will try and con you into getting it, the fact that it's being resold and used as a drug of abuse instead of a prescription drug for pain.
But what about this school of thought that all this publicity, whether it's from the warnings or just, you know, media stories about it, are actually increasing the demand for the drug because it's telling people what a great high it is?
Well, it's interesting. I've heard that mostly from the company that makes it, Purdue Pharma, and they've said in a few places that the media is really spreading this problem. What I've heard from law enforcement people, from addicts themselves, and from drug counselors at rehab centers is that they want the word out there. They want doctors, parents, individual people to know that this drug, when it's abused, can be very dangerous. So that's the message that I'm getting from the people who are most affected.
Paul Tuff from the New York Times Magazine, thanks so much for being our guest.
Thank you.